On the domestic front, I remember there was some controversy around Vice President Atta. Were you around around that time?
Well, I'm very honest with you. When I heard it, I was in my house, and I heard it was. So I rushed to the castle.
Yes.
And I saw him sitting there in his room, his private quarters.
He's supposed to have punched him. Was that the story?
No, yeah, that's what I heard.
That's what you heard. That's what we heard.
Yeah, so I came and I said, how did it happen that you punched the man? And he said to me, I didn't punch him. Because what had happened was that President Carr had spoken at the May Day event at the Black Star Square. And I must admit that the Carr family are also a family that I know very well, close to. And he had made criticisms of the government.
While he was a vice president?
While he was a vice president. And that's what upset Rawlings. So I saw him sitting in the quarters and I said to him, Chief, what happened? And he said, oh, well, it was a cabinet meeting. And how could you come in and sit in a cabinet meeting when you had criticized the people? So he asked him to leave. And that is what. So I don't know whether blows were exchanged or what had happened. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, because it's giving us bad press outside. And he said, no, well, that's what happened. I took it as that.
Because the media ran with it.
Seriously. Oh, they ran with it.
When things like that happened, how did you, as a media person, how did you try and bring down the controversy?
No, I mean, I didn't have a role like writing or going out and defending. But what we did was we had a very wily minister in Kofi Totobikwachi. So, would discuss how we'd do it. And they'd come up with an answer, But the thing is that Jerry Rawlings is the person who you either loved or hated.
There was no middle ground.
But later on, later on, people realized that image, the stern image, the brusque image, the bully boy image was wrong. And when he went out to meet people, they loved him, especially the rank and file of Ghanaians, because he was very welcoming to them. He enjoyed being with them.
Is it true that he used to drive around in town in an unmarked car and just see things for himself?
You don't need an unmarked car. He had a car that he would drive, and he'd like to go and see things in town.
So he actually did that?
But not to go and say, I'm looking at these things so that I can punish somebody. But, just get a feel of the country or the city that he lived in.
Without his bodyguards?
Oh, very rarely. He had a couple of bodyguards who he moved around with, but he wasn't a person who liked that trapping of having bully boys or soldiers around him. He knew that it had to happen because he was the president.
I heard a story, I think you told me a story some time back about how he gave somebody a lift to the person home. What happened there?
We'd gone to, he liked to spend time in Akosobo. He really loved the idea of the Volta Lake. Remember they had the Onipanuya, which went around the Volta Lake,
the boat.
The boat, which was, Onipanuya was a health, like a
floating hospital?
Floating hospital.
Okay.
Yes. Clinic, more so than that. And so we're coming back, and then on the Liberation Road, we saw an old lady walking. All right. And he stopped, and I was sitting in front, so he said, go to the back. So we stopped, and he asked the old lady, where was she going? She said she was going to Adabaka. And apparently she'd come from a funeral a week or something, and had sort of lost her bearings.
Okay.
So we took her to Adabaka. He dropped her. And the bodyguard in the back, he has to make sure that she gets into her house and everything, and take her name. All right. Later on, I heard that he had been sending her provisions and all these things came from his salary. I'm sure he must have been very difficult for the family because he was
helping
always,
everybody.
It
was almost like he always wanted to help people.
That is very true. That is very true. Always wanted to help. He was that curious. And that inquiring. Yeah.
From one vice president to another. So from Vice President Atta to Vice President Mills.
Yes.
Do you know the story of how he came about the selection of Mr. Mills? Because you were thick in the media back then.
I wasn't involved in that selection process. But when Atta Mills accepted to be the vice presidential candidate for the elections in 1996, I filmed his acceptance speech. But the thing is that when I talked to Jerry Rawlings, when I talked to Jerry Rawlings about it, he said the man had a brain, fascinating brain, and that he had a belief in his integrity. And as he told me, he said, and if this man ever becomes president, I want you to work with him as well as you've worked with me. And that's what I can say at this moment in time.
So he admired him for his intellectual prowess.
Yes, and hard work. Atta Mills was a very humble person, but he had a brain.
And so we went off to the 2000 elections.
Yes.
And we know the history. President Baffour won, which meant President Mills lost.
Yes.
How did President Rawlings take that defeat? Because of course, this was his person that he would have loved to win.
He believed that we had lost the plot. That we didn't have to lose. We shouldn't have lost that election. Somewhere along the line, we lost the election. All right. So he was taken aback. He wasn't very, very happy about it. But being a soldier, he said, let's move on. Let's see what we can do in 2004 and later on in 2008. And he worked towards it.
Did he have this sneaky suspicion that Ghanaians were now tired of Rawlings and they saw Mr. Mills as, Professor Mills as maybe a Rawlings man? And so, you know what, let's vote against him instead of for Kufuor.
I think he was, honestly, he must have looked at it and seen that it could have, that was the way it was going to go. But he was sad because he believed that that dispensation, that polity was not too good for Ghana, all right, because he was a man of the people and this was a property-owning democracy party, But he realized that there was hope because it was a democratic process and there was a chance that we could win power back.
Did that term irk him, property-owning democracy?
Of course, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
What did he have against it?
Because he believed that this was a developing country. And so everybody had to have the opportunity of being successful in whatever they did. And if you had a property-owning democracy, then they'll be more selfish in the fact that they're looking for their properties and they'll protect their properties against human beings.